Listen, don't make the same mistakes I made. If you're gonna be interviewing freelancers to work on your next website, you'll definitely wanna check this out. I wanna talk to you about how the topic of capacity can tell you whether or not someone is a good fit. I'm sure at some point you are already gonna ask the question, how many projects are you working on, right? And that's great. But whenever I asked this question in the past, I would get an answer like, oh, I'm working on about 2 or 3 projects, they're almost done, blah, 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 and it's about it. And honestly, I would just be satisfied with that answer and I would move on and ask my next question. Then I would just ask about their process, show me some past work, all of that stuff, right? What I didn't realize back then, which I do now, is that I could have gained way more insight into this person had I just lingered and talked a little bit deeper about the topic of capacity. I don't want you to make the same mistakes, so let me share a few things with you. Capacity is how much someone can handle at any given time. It's important to know because we want to make sure the person we're talking to, that they have enough room on their schedule for our project. Duh. Don't ever make the mistake of assuming that just because they're talking to you that they actually have the right amount of capacity to take on your project. There's a lot of reasons why someone might overcommit to a project that they can't actually take on, and it's really, really hard to gauge whether someone is at max capacity, just right, or under. So what all of this really boils down to is it's all about attention. How much attention are we as the client going to get from this person? But there are levels to it. You might be the type of client that's pretty hands-off and don't really require them, to be emailing you every single day about updates, and that's okay. But even then, you want to make sure that the project is moving along and that things are getting done and that you're getting the attention that you deserve. So when you're interviewing someone and the topic of capacity comes up, what you're really asking is, how much attention can you give me once this project starts? So now, let me walk you through the questions I ask and the answers that I'm looking for. We want to start talking about the existing work they currently have on their plate. Don't just ask how many projects you're working on, but instead dig deeper and find out what stages the projects are in, when are they expected to be completed, and do they have any work already lined up as soon as the project is done? This matters a lot because it shows us project management and scheduling awareness. It also tells us how hectic their schedule might actually be. It's not necessarily a major red flag, although I actually consider it to be a red flag, but we want to be cautious if a person is doing 2 projects at the same time in the same phase, meaning they're both in design or they're both in the development phase of the project. So another thing we're looking for is the level of detail and how well they can communicate an overview of their production pipeline. If they struggle to tell you where they're at with their projects and give you meaningful detail about their production schedule, then the overall risk for disorganization, miscommunication, and overall just falling behind on the project, that really just goes up. I wouldn't say it's a major red flag and you should just not consider them at all, but just, pay attention to how they talk about these things. You just want someone who's hyper aware of what stages the projects are in. Someone who can clearly communicate the production schedule and the variables that might come up during the project. Something like, I'm just wrapping up this project and we expect to be complete next week, but the client tends to take a little bit longer to get revisions and it requires a couple more rounds. So, the project might wrap up about 2 weeks from where we had planned it to be. That's what we want to hear, some details. And now, while most people will definitely talk about, and ask questions like, what projects are you working on? A lot of people forget to ask about maintenance retainers. This is really important. In web design and development, maintenance work means ongoing support after the site is launched. It's actually a great sign if your candidate has multiple maintenance retainers. It shows that people trust them enough to continue to work with them. But this type of work impacts us in a few ways. Maintenance typically means bug fixes, small site updates, those types of things. But that's not all. It also means this person's on call if the site goes down or just something urgent comes up. It's definitely a different ballgame because the site is published and it's up there and live and people are visiting the website. So if something goes wrong, your person is gonna have to address it as soon as humanly possible. So what does this mean and what does this have to do with our project? Well, it means your project gets paused until the fire has been put out. Talk through the maintenance projects, find out how active these sites are and how often do updates and requests from these types of clients come up. The amount of projects doesn't really matter if they're constantly getting bogged down by these tiny little tasks from all of their maintenance retainers. Hey, if you're finding value in this, hit the like and subscribe, it really helps me out. And also, I'm always trying to release a bunch of videos helping clients like you find the right freelancers, understand this complicated process a little bit better so you can really nail down your next site. Between full projects and maintenance work, you'll want to understand how much headroom the person you're talking to actually has. We just don't want to be the project project that takes them to the max capacity. There's kind of a sweet spot here. If they take us on, we want to know that they're able to take on another project that's maybe small all the way to medium size. This breathing room or headroom gives us that level of assurance that our freelancer will be able to work on our stuff in a good headspace without being really stressed out because they're drowning in work. Okay, so to summarize, ask how many projects they're working on, what stages these projects are in, and if they have maintenance work, how often are they called on to do a bunch of tasks. You'll want someone who's working on 1 to 2 projects at different stages. Now, the amount of maintenance retainers can definitely vary because some are more demanding than others, so it can really just be like 1, 2, 6, or 8 or whatever. But yeah, it kind of depends on their response on how demanding some of these clients are. Red flags would be if they have 0 projects or if they have 3 or more. Worse yet, if they have projects in the same stages, like multiple projects, then you definitely want to be cautious about that. Listen to how they talk about where the projects are in the process. Are they able to articulate this clearly, or are they pretty short and barely answer your question? Because the way they respond will give you an insight into how they will be in terms of communication, how they explain their process, and correspond with you just throughout the entire project. Whether it's good or bad that they talk a lot or over-explain things, it really comes down to your preference here. So just make sure that whoever you're talking to matches with your vibe and kind of what your expectations are as far as communication goes. Whether it's good or bad that they talk too much or over-explain, or maybe they don't talk enough, it really comes down to you and what your preferences are. The topic of capacity is a deep one. You really need to probe into this and linger on it during your next interview. It can tell us a lot about our freelancers, like who they are, what their business looks like, and just overall how they think through their production process. While some points here might be red flags to some and not so much of a concern to others, just remember that it really boils down to you and your preference as the client. But first, always decide on what type of client you'll be. Are you hands-on or hands-off? And finally, how much attention do you want and are expecting from your freelancer? So I hope you found that valuable. I'll catch you on the next one.